Again, welcome to our Living Wisely, Living Well satsang. My name is Nayaswami Devarshi. It's a joy to share these beautiful teachings this evening. As I think most of you know, we have a daily reading from Swami Kriyanandaji's book, Living Wisely, Living Well. There are short readings for every day throughout the year. Very beautiful little pieces of divine wisdom and advice. And this week, November 18th, today, the topic is Give Praise Sincerely. And the reading is, Give praise sincerely, but understatedly. Never flatter anyone. Praise the God in others, but not their egos. For you, as their friend, ought always to support their aspirations toward the spiritual heights. Swami Kriyanandaji is giving advice partly on how to give praise, also on how to receive praise. More specifically on giving praise, he's telling people don't overdo it. I think this is actually one of the things I appreciate being in India, is that people do tend to understate rather than overstate. Americans can be rather boisterous and overdo it with things like praise and how awesome someone looks, but also there can be a tendency to flatter people's ego by overdoing it and by trying to get on their good side. And Swamiji here is saying, don't ever flatter the ego. And try, the foundation of doing this correctly is to try to see people as a soul rather than an ego or a personality. And one of the beautiful things about being around a great saint or a master is that people feel very, very uplifted around them. And the reason they feel uplifted is that saints and masters, by recognizing and tuning into and loving the soul, the divine presence that is each and every person, they draw that and awaken that in the individual person. And this is why people feel uplifted in the presence of a saint or a master, because their soul starts to awaken and their ego starts to diminish. And it doesn't even have to happen with words, it's just by recognition of who and what each one of us is by a saint or a master. And so that is the beginning of how to put this words into practice, of not flattering and not praising the ego, is to recognize even those who you are very close to as divine beings, rather than as an ego or a personality, and try to relate to that divine presence, to the soul, rather than relating just to the ego or personality. Obviously, we have to relate somewhat to the person. We do have personal natures and qualities, especially those who we are very close to. We have more of a personal connection, but even then, try always to tune into the divine behind the personality. I have a friend, a long-time member at Ananda village, who puts it in a sort of a homespun kind of a way. How she relates to people, or she tries to, is that when she is talking to someone, she tries to visualize or imagine a rainbow connecting from the top of her head to the top of the head of the person that she is relating to, as a way of seeing this divine connection between two souls, rather than just an ego connection. And you'll find that when you start to relate to people in that way, this tendency to praise the ego or to flatter people pretty much dissolves on its own. Now, this quality of sincerity is a very important one on the spiritual path. It's quite interesting how often Paramahansa Yoganandaji talked about sincerity as a true quality that one should work with developing. Even his guru, Sri Yukteswarji, who we see as this very stern person, very stern eyes and stern countenance, even he advised his disciple Yoganandaji on how to relate to people with sincerity. The way Sri Yukteswar put it, he said, "Good manners without sincerity are like a beautiful dead lady. Straightforwardness without civility is like a surgeon's knife, effective but unpleasant. Candor without courtesy is helpful, or excuse me, candor with courtesy is helpful and admirable. And he's saying that he often advised his disciple Yoganandaji to learn to behave. And learning to behave means to have a certain warmth and sincere warmth in the way that we relate to others. And so this idea of not flattering the ego doesn't mean that one is cold with people. In fact, I think there's more of an opportunity to be divinely warm and loving with people when you're relating on a soul level. But also just Sri Yukteswarji was just saying to his disciple, have some manners. And those manners include civility, kindness, courtesy, and especially sincerity. So one time Swami Kriyanandaji, he answers this question about what is sincerity. And before I get into that, I just want to mention what a sincere person Swamiji was. When he was with people, he was completely sincere. He was kind, he was warm, he often gave very strong advice to people who asked for it and who were ready for it. But he came from a center of compassion, kindness, and warmth. And so true sincerity comes from this center of the heart's natural love, as Sri Yukteswarji put it. One of the things about Swamiji, and I think part of the way that he could be very sincere, is that when he was with people, he was completely present with them. He wasn't talking to them and glancing out the window, looking at this or that, and then bringing his attention back to the person or being distracted. When he was with you, he was 100% with you. Whatever he did, he was 100% focused on that. But when he was with a person, he was completely present. And this is a really, really admirable quality. I think in today's very busy world, we've all seen people who we talk to them and we might have a serious question for them and they're just very distracted. Their mind is restless and not completely with you. You can tell they're thinking of something else. And I think we all are aware that we just tend to not want to be around people like that. But when people are completely present in the moment and really paying full attention to us, again, not as an ego, but as a divine being, which, again, these are the saints and the masters, the example that they gave us, then we want to be around those people. And so try to be one of those people that others want to be around. And that simply means being kind, being sincere, giving people your full attention when you're with them. There's another way of being that's I've seen expressed in modern times quite a lot, in more recent times, which is the advice to be authentic. And what that means is sort of maybe a more overly complex way of saying just be yourself. Don't try to put on any false cover or false airs, and don't try to be someone else. I think when we relate to people who are trying to be something other than they are, it puts a sort of a veil over them, and there's a certain amount of insincerity to that. And simply just be yourself, be true to yourself, be completely present with people, and you'll find that people have a deep appreciation for those who are like that. And again, coming from this level of not just good manners outwardly, but sincerity, which in a way, the way that Sri Yukteswarji was expressing this, that good manners without sincerity are like a beautiful dead lady. He was saying that the manners themselves is just the surface, and the sincerity comes from within. It comes from the heart. Now, how do we apply sincerity in our relationship to God? Because this is very interesting. I was looking into this topic of sincerity. I was pleasantly surprised at how much Swami Kriyanandaji, how much Yoganandaji used this word sincerity in trying to encourage the devotee to have a sincere relationship with the divine. Swami Kriyananda puts it in this way. He says, if you will utter any chant or mantra with a deep inner consciousness of its purpose, and from the fullness of your own being, the words will be effective even if your outward pronunciation of them is not exact. Of course, it is better still to combine inner sincerity with outward correctness. Sincerity, however, is always more powerful than mere external forms. And he goes on to say, and what is sincerity? It is any intention that has the support of one's whole being. As the chest is a sounding board for the voice, so one's inner consciousness is the sounding board for whatever mental or spiritual qualities vibrate in the voice. And so sincerity is the deep, pure intention of the heart, the deep, pure yearning, the deep, pure love for the divine that transcends all forms and all religions. And so we don't need to get the words right, we don't need to get the form right, we really just need to get the sincerity and the pure feelings of the heart correct. There's a humorous story that Paramahansa Yogananda writes about in his autobiography of a yogi. He recounts a story, a short story told by Leo Tolstoy, the Russian author. And in this story, there are 3 hermits who live on a remote island. And these 3 hermits develop a great reputation for holiness, for miracles, and everyone considers them to be saints, and people visit them even in a remote island just for that reason. And so the officials of the church hear about this, and they decide to pay these 3 hermit saints a visit to see what they're about and how they became saints, especially not having a regular contact with the official church authorities and the priests and the bishops and the like. And so they take a ship, a boat, and they go out to the island, and the bishop of the region meets with these 3 saints, and he asks them, what is your spiritual practice that you do? And one of them says, we are very, very simple people, and we don't know all the official prayers. In fact, we only have one prayer, and our prayer is, Thou art 3, we are 3, mercy on us. And Thou art 3 is referring to the Trinity, the Divine Trinity, and this was their prayer. That's all they ever prayed. Thou art 3, we are 3, have mercy on us. And the bishop sort of probably looked on them condescendingly and thought, what could these people really understand about prayer and religion if they have such a silly prayer like this? So he taught them all the official prayers of the church, the real prayers as he was seeing it. And he taught them all these prayers, and he was confident that he had set them on the right track. And then he got on his boat, and the boat started sailing away. And it was in the evening, and as the boat sailed away, he looked back at the island. And he looked back and he saw something very unusual. He saw 3 large spots of light moving across the water from the island towards the boat. And he was dumbfounded by what this might be. And as these 3 spots of light got closer to the boat, he saw that it was these 3 hermits were running across the top of the water, on top of the waves, rushing to the boat. And they finally got to the boat, and the bishop said, what are you doing? Why do you want? And these 3 hermits said, one of them said, we've already forgotten these great, fantastic prayers that you taught us. Please repeat these prayers to us again so that we can practice prayer in the, quote, the right way. And the bishop finally understood his arrogance and his misunderstanding. He just sent them his blessings and said, you don't need these official prayers. Obviously the prayer that you are doing is sufficient for you to perform such miracles. Just go back to your island and continue with your prayers. And so true prayer even is from the heart. It's not from the mind. It's really from the deep, sincere yearning of the child before the Lord. And so work on that level of prayer rather than on the outward form of prayer. Swami Kriyanandaji talks about this. He says, conscious bliss, the very source of existence, is always the same, whether it be called God, Allah, Jehovah, or Brahman. The differences in the religions of the world are only colorations given by the mind of man. Whatever differences exist in the flow of grace and power depend on the individual's sincerity and not on the outer forms his worship takes. Prayer and worship, when sincerely offered, attract definite blessings. And so it's all about the deep sincerity, and it's not about the form, it's not about the words. I'm reminded again of a friend in Ananda village who is an example of going against the common form and using a prayer that probably priests of East and West would frown upon, because what she did was to take a very traditional and holy form of prayer and change it around. The reason she did this is that she would pray with her two daughters, and she would pray and meditate regularly. And one of the daughters' names was Shanti, the other one's name was Isabel. And when she would pray with them, she would pray, and then at the closing of the prayer, as Paramahansa Yoganandaji would typically end a prayer, she would end the prayer by saying Om Shanti Amen. And this went on for only a very short time before the younger daughter, Isabel, who knew less about things like prayer, finally started complaining. She complained to her mom, "Here you are closing the prayer, and you mention my sister Shanti's name, but you don't mention my name." Now, a very official and haughty priest, like this bishop in the Tolstoy story, would have explained to this child that this was a prayer and Shanti is part of the prayer, etc., etc. But the love of the mother came through much more than the priestly side. And so from then on, the mother would pray, and she would conclude her prayers by saying, Om Shanti Isabel Amen. And again, a priest, I imagine there would be priests of East and West who would listen to this prayer and frown when they heard how someone had changed the sacred words of this prayer. But again, God looks at the heart, looks at the sincerity, looks at the love, and looks beyond words. Yoganandaji said that the deepest form of prayer is without words. The deepest way to relate to God even is beyond outward form, and purely with the deep feeling of divine bliss and divine love in the heart. Yoganandaji said in a prayer of his once, which we're going to listen to in a few minutes, he said, "I cannot worship thee with words, but only with wistful yearning." And he was describing, again, this much deeper form of prayer, which is beyond words and is only with deep, sincere feeling and deep, sincere yearning. Yoganandaji also said once, he said about God, and his way of relating to God was very pure, very childlike, and not of the mind. It was purely of the heart. He said, "God wants to be sure whether we want him or not. I think he has an inferiority complex, don't you?" He said jokingly. "I know he is laughing too. He wants to see whether we really want him. With sincerity, you can win him. He is like a little child, but without sincerity, nothing can conquer him. Suffer little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. He is like a little child. Don't be afraid of him, and always ask him things. Talk to him. Remove all barriers. You are all alone in this world, and alone you will leave it, as alone you came into it. He is the one you must win. You must love him and seek him unceasingly. You must pray to him unceasingly, silently. Don't be a beggar, but coax him unceasingly. That is what God expects. And I think it is the most wonderful aspect of God, that even though he has pushed us away in the mire of delusion, constantly he is drawing us back to him." And so I'll repeat these words of advice that he gives. He says, he wants to see whether we really want him. With sincerity, you can win him. He is like a little child, but without sincerity, Nothing can conquer him. And so we'll close by listening to this short prayer that Yoganandaji gives, and we'll listen to it in his own voice. It's a recording of him giving his prayer at night. And in this prayer is the prayer where he says, "I cannot worship thee with words, but only with wistful yearning." And as we listen to this prayer for a few minutes, close your eyes and tune in to the Guru and his consciousness. And when the prayer ends, we'll conclude our webinar just by turning off the camera, and I won't say anything after Yoganandaji's words finish. And just go into meditation if you have the opportunity. Spend some time tuning in to the feeling and to the consciousness and to the deep sincerity and yearning of the great Guru's words, and carry that into meditation.
Connected to 1+1.
I am praying the prayer at night. Pray with me with the deepest devotion of your souls. With closed eyes, I sit in the temple of night and worship thee. The sunlight, revealing a million alluring things, has vanished. One by one, I have closed the doors of my senses, lest the fragrance of the rose or the song of the nightingale distract my love from thee. I am alone in this dark, dark temple. I have left everything, but where art thou? Darkness is haunting, but unafraid I am groping, seeking, crying for thee. Will thou leave me alone? Come, show thyself. The door of my memory swings open, throbbingly thrilled, my heart looks for thee, but I find thee not. Halt, ye throng of a million thoughts and experiences past, come not in my sacred temple. I close the bursting, thought-pressed door and run everywhere to find thee. Where art thou? Darkness deepens, and as I sit still in anguish of despair, I behold a little taper of concentration burning within me. I stand up and madly rush to the dimly lighted temple. The farther I go, the deeper grows the gloom. I clasp the empty darkness in hope of seizing thee. Finding thee not, I return again and see the taper dimly burning. I sing outwardly a loud prayer. My large teardrops and my strong gusts of prayers almost extinguish the taper. I will pray no more with words, nor rush or run about in the temple of Stygian darkness, nor drown the taper with my tears. I will sit still and command my breath to make no sound. I rebuke my boisterous love for thee. The taper of meditation burns brighter now. Oh, how maddening! I cannot worship thee with words, but only with wistful yearning. Brighter the light grows. I behold thee now. Thou art I worship thee. As night hides everything, I will worship thee in hidden silence. I am glad with the joy of all minds. I will use the screen of the night to hide myself from the tempting things of the day. O night, when I am worried, throw thy veil of silent darkness around me. Create a dark temple for me wherever I go, that I may invoke and call him whom I love, my beloved, at any time, anywhere, everywhere.